The invitation to the Metropolitan Children's Hospital annual gala arrived on thick cream cardstock, embossed with gold lettering. An evening of hope, it proclaimed with a dress code notation at the bottom, black tie required. I almost didn't go. These charity galas were always the same, a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and social positioning where the actual charitable cause became secondary to who wore the most expensive gown and which family donated enough money to get their name on a plaque. But this particular gala was different. It was for the Children's Hospital where I'd spent 3 months when I was 8 years old fighting leukemia. The place that had saved my life and inspired my eventual career in biomedical research. So despite my reservations about spending an evening with Dad and his new family, I RSVP'd yes. The relationship with my father had been complicated since my mother died when I was 12. He'd remarried 2 years later to Victoria, a woman who came with her own set of social expectations and 3 children from her previous marriage. Victoria had made it clear from the beginning that she intended to elevate the family's social status, and my quiet, studious nature didn't fit her vision of what a successful family looked like. At 28, I was a senior research scientist at GeneTech Solutions, a biomedical company specializing in pediatric cancer treatments. It was meaningful work that paid well, but it wasn't flashy. I spent my days in laboratories and research facilities, not boardrooms and country clubs. I drove a sensible car, lived in a modest apartment, and owned exactly one cocktail dress that I'd bought 3 years ago for my college roommate's wedding. Victoria found my lifestyle disappointing, and never hesitated to share suggestions about how I could be more successful, meaning more visible, more social, more focused on accumulating the kind of wealth and status that impressed her friends. Dad, to his credit, had initially defended my choices. But over the 6 years since his remarriage, I'd watched him gradually adopt Victoria's values and perspectives. Her children, Michael, 26, who worked in real estate, Jennifer, 24, who was finishing her MBA, and David, 22, who was still in college, had all embraced the competitive social climbing that Victoria encouraged. I had not. Which brought me to Saturday evening standing in front of my closet, trying to figure out how to look appropriately dressed for a $500 per plate charity gala. The black cocktail dress was my only option. It was simple, elegant, and bought at a department store rather than a designer boutique. I paired it with modest heels and the pearl necklace my mother had left me. In the mirror, I looked presentable but unremarkable, exactly what I'd intended. What my family didn't know was that my modest lifestyle was deliberate choice, not a financial limitation. 3 years ago, I developed a breakthrough treatment protocol for pediatric leukemia that had attracted the attention of several major pharmaceutical companies. After a bidding war that lasted 6 months, I'd licensed my research to Biopharm Industries for $47 million upfront plus royalties on future sales. The money had been life-changing, but I'd been extremely careful about how I used it. I'd invested the majority through a private wealth management firm, donated substantial amounts to medical research foundations, and continued living modestly while I figured out how to handle sudden wealth responsibly. I'd kept the financial windfall private for several reasons. The medical research community could be competitive, and I didn't want colleagues treating me differently because of money. My family had a tendency to treat any success as a group achievement rather than an individual accomplishment. And honestly, I'd learned that people's attitudes toward you change dramatically when they know you're wealthy. But there was another reason I'd kept quiet about the money, one that was more personal and more complicated. 6 months after licensing my research, I'd approached the Metropolitan Children's Hospital about funding a new pediatric oncology wing. I'd worked with their development team to design a state-of-the-art facility that would provide the kind of compassionate, cutting-edge care that had saved my life 20 years earlier. The donation was $10 million, structured through a foundation I'd established specifically for medical research funding. I'd requested complete anonymity, not wanting the attention that came with being a major donor. For 3 years I'd watched as the new wing was designed, built, and equipped with the latest technology. I'd attended construction updates and equipment installations, always in my capacity as a research consultant, rather than as the donor. The wing was scheduled to open next month, and tonight's gala was meant to celebrate its completion and thank the anonymous donor who had made it possible. I arrived at the Metropolitan Club at 7 p.m., valet parking my modest Honda Civic behind a line of luxury vehicles. The contrast was stark: BMWs, Mercedes and Porsches gleaming under the valet lights, while my 5-year-old Honda looked like it belonged in a different postal code. Inside, the ballroom was decorated in silver and gold, with elegant floral arrangements and soft lighting that made everything look expensive and sophisticated. I found the registration table and picked up my name tag, then looked around for my family's table. Dad was easy to spot: tall, distinguished, and wearing the kind of perfectly tailored tuxedo that announced serious money. Victoria stood beside him in a stunning emerald gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her diamond necklace catching the light with every movement. Her children were arranged around them like a perfectly styled family portrait. I approached their table, and Victoria's smile was the kind that managed to be welcoming and condescending simultaneously. "Claire, darling, you made it." She air-kissed me in the way that never actually made contact. "Don't you look nice?" Nice. The word carried just enough emphasis to make it clear that nice was several steps below what she'd hoped for. "Thank you, Victoria. You look beautiful. This old thing." She touched her necklace casually. "It was Robert's anniversary gift. 20 carats, you know." Dad hugged me warmly, but I could see him taking in my appearance with the kind of assessment that Victoria had trained him to make. "Claire, sweetheart, you look lovely. Though." He glanced at Victoria, then back at me. "Maybe next time we could go shopping together? Victoria knows some wonderful boutiques." The implication was clear. My appearance was adequate but could be improved with proper guidance and more expensive clothes. Michael and Jennifer greeted me politely, both of them looking perfectly at home in this world of wealth and social positioning. David, still young enough to be relatively uncorrupted by Victoria's values, gave me a genuine smile and asked about my work. "Still curing cancer?" he asked with the kind of earnest respect that reminded me why I'd always liked him. "Working on it," I said simply. Victoria overheard and launched into her familiar critique. "Claire does important work, of course, but I keep telling her she should think about the business side of medicine. There's so much more money in administration or pharmaceutical sales." "I'm happy with research," I said. "But darling, you could be making so much more money. Look at Michael, he's doing wonderfully in real estate, already making 6 figures. Michael beamed under his stepmother's praise. "Actually, I just closed a deal that'll put me well into 6 figures this year." "That's wonderful," I said and meant it. Michael worked hard and deserved his success. "What about you, Claire?" Jennifer asked. "What's your salary like in research?" It was a rude question but typical for this family. Everything came back to money and status. "I do well enough," I said diplomatically. Victoria's expression suggested that well enough was not nearly well enough. As we took our seats for dinner, I found myself positioned between David and a stranger, while Victoria arranged her biological children closer to Dad and the center of conversation. The seating arrangement was subtle but clear. I was family, but barely. Dinner was the usual charity gala fare, elegantly prepared food that cost more for presentation than taste, accompanied by speeches about the importance of philanthropic giving and community support. The hospital's CEO spoke about the new pediatric oncology wing, describing it as a magnificent facility made possible by extraordinary generosity. "We are so grateful," he continued, "to all our donors, but especially to the anonymous benefactor whose $10 million gift made this dream a reality." The room erupted in appreciative applause. At our table, Victoria leaned toward Dad. $10 million, she whispered admiringly. "Can you imagine having that kind of money to give away?" Dad nodded. "That's the kind of philanthropy that really makes a difference. Real money, real impact." I sipped my wine and said nothing. As dessert was being served, Dad leaned across the table toward me, his voice low but carrying clearly to the rest of our group. "You're embarrassing the family name," he whispered, but loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "Couldn't you dress better?" I felt heat rise in my cheeks, the familiar sting of public criticism that Dad had never quite learned to avoid. Victoria nodded approvingly, adjusting her diamond necklace in a gesture that seemed designed to emphasize the contrast between her obvious wealth and my apparent modesty. "Claire, darling," she added in a stage whisper, "presentation is so important at events like this. People notice these things." Several people at neighboring tables had turned to look at our conversation, their expressions ranging from curious to embarrassed on my behalf. "I'm appropriately dressed," I said quietly. Appropriate, yes, Dad continued, his voice still carrying more widely than he seemed to realize. But this is about representing the family. The Hendersons are here, the Williamsons, the Carrutherses. These are important social connections, and when you look like... He gestured vaguely at my outfit. Like what, Dad? Like you don't belong here. Like you can't afford to belong here. The words hung in the air, and I could see people at surrounding tables pretending not to listen while obviously fascinated by the family drama unfolding in front of them. Victoria's children looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. David appeared genuinely upset by his stepfather's criticism, but he was young and didn't have the social confidence to challenge Dad publicly. I was about to respond when the Master of Ceremonies returned to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for one final announcement. The room quieted, conversations fading as guests turned toward the stage. As I mentioned earlier, our new pediatric oncology wing was made possible by an extraordinary $10 million donation from an anonymous benefactor. For 3 years, this generous individual has preferred to remain unnamed, but tonight, they have agreed to reveal themselves and share a few words about why this cause is so important to them. My heart started racing. This wasn't part of the plan. I'd specifically requested complete anonymity, with no expectation of public recognition. Then the host announced, "Our anonymous $10 million donor has agreed to reveal themselves tonight." Dad had been taking a sip of wine when the announcement began, and at the mention of the donor reveal he nearly choked, wine going down wrong as he processed what he was hearing. Victoria's eyes lit up with excitement, clearly thrilled at the prospect of discovering which of their social circle was wealthy enough to make such a donation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC continued, "please join me in welcoming Dr. Claire Morrison, whose groundbreaking research in pediatric leukemia treatment and extraordinary generosity have made tonight's celebration possible." The room erupted in applause, but at our table, complete silence. Dad's wine glass was frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide with shock. Victoria's expression had shifted from excited anticipation to complete bewilderment. Michael and Jennifer were staring at me like I'd suddenly sprouted wings. Only David was smiling, clapping enthusiastically as he realized what had just happened. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, and made my way to the podium. The applause continued, growing stronger as people realized the magnitude of what they'd just learned. At the microphone, I looked out at a room full of faces. Some surprised, some impressed, some calculating what this revelation meant for their own social positioning. "Thank you," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "This is unexpected. I had planned to remain anonymous." Gentle laughter from the audience. 20 years ago, I was a patient in the old pediatric oncology ward at Metropolitan Children's Hospital. I was 8 years old, fighting leukemia and terrified. The room had gone completely quiet. The doctors and nurses in that ward saved my life, but more than that, they showed me what compassion looked like. They treated me not just as a patient, but as a whole person worthy of dignity and hope. I paused, finding Dad's face in the crowd. He was still staring at me in shock. That experience inspired me to pursue medical research. Everything I've accomplished professionally stems from wanting to give other children the same chance at life that I received. More applause, warmer now. The new pediatric oncology wing represents the kind of care every child deserves, cutting-edge medical technology combined with an environment designed for healing and hope. It's not just about treating disease. It's about preserving childhood and supporting families during the most difficult time in their lives. I looked directly at my table where Victoria was still processing the revelation. This donation represents the best use I could imagine for money I've been fortunate enough to earn. Medical research has been very good to me, and I believe in using that success to create opportunities for others. As I returned to my seat, the applause was thunderous. People were standing, clapping enthusiastically, and I could see phones being pulled out as news of the revelation began spreading on social media. At our table, the silence was deafening. Dad was the first to find his voice. "Claire, $10 million. How did you?" "I licensed my research to Biopharm Industries 3 years ago," I said simply. "Pediatric leukemia treatment protocols." It was a significant deal. Victoria's mouth was opening and closing without sound. Finally, she managed, "You've had $10 million for 3 years? I've had more than that. The licensing deal was $47 million upfront, plus royalties. Michael's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. 47 million? Jennifer whispered. Plus ongoing royalties from treatment sales. It's been quite successful. Dad looked around the table, then back at me. Claire, why didn't you tell us? When? During the conversations where you criticized my career choices? During the family dinners where Victoria explained how I could be more successful if I just focused on making money instead of wasting time on research? Victoria finally found her voice. But darling, if we'd known. If you'd known what? That you didn't need to be embarrassed by my modest lifestyle? That you didn't need to criticize my appearance at charity galas? That the family name wasn't actually being damaged by my choice to live quietly while working in medical research? The surrounding tables had gone quiet again, clearly listening to our family conversation with fascination. Dad's face had gone pale. Claire, I had no idea. The things I said tonight. The things you said tonight reflect what you actually think about me, Dad. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of my bank account balance. Victoria was rapidly recalculating social dynamics. Well, of course we're proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you were special. Did you? Because 20 minutes ago, Dad was telling me I was embarrassing the family name with my appearance. You were suggesting I needed to dress better to represent the family properly. People at neighboring tables weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. Our family drama had become dinner theater for half the ballroom. That was before we understood. Victoria began. Before you understood that I could afford better clothes? That I chose to dress modestly rather than being forced to by financial limitations. David finally spoke up. Claire, this is incredible. You've literally saved children's lives and funded an entire hospital wing. That's amazing. Thank you, David. But why did you keep it secret? Michael asked. I mean, this is incredible success. Why not share it with family? I looked around the table at these people who had spent years making me feel inadequate for choosing meaning over money, purpose over profit. Because I learned that this family's respect and inclusion was conditional on wealth and status. Because I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I was just a researcher making a modest salary. Because I wanted to know if you valued me for who I am or for what I could provide. The silence stretched uncomfortably. And now we know, I continued quietly. Dad reached across the table. Claire, we love you. We're proud of you. You just assumed that because I lived modestly and worked in research, I wasn't successful enough to represent the family name properly. We made mistakes, Victoria said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. You made choices. You chose to criticize instead of support. You chose to assume instead of ask. You chose to value appearance over substance. I stood up from the table. Where are you going? Dad asked. Home. I've accomplished what I came here to do, support the hospital and the new wing. The social networking portion of the evening doesn't really interest me. As I walked away from the table, I could hear urgent whispered conversations breaking out behind me. My revelation had shifted every social dynamic in the room, and people were rapidly adjusting their understanding of who I was and what my presence at future events might mean. My phone was already buzzing with notifications, news outlets picking up the story, medical research colleagues congratulating me, and several text messages from people at the gala who suddenly wanted to connect. In the valet line, I handed over my ticket and waited for my Honda Civic, smiling at the thought of driving away from this display of wealth and status in my sensible, practical car. The valet looked confused when he brought the Honda to the front of the line, clearly expecting someone who'd just announced a $10 million donation to be driving something more expensive. This is yours, ma'am? He asked politely. Yes, it is. It's just, after your speech. After my speech, it's still the same reliable car that gets me where I need to go. As I drove away from the Metropolitan Club, I thought about the evening's events. I'd maintained my anonymity for 3 years, but tonight had forced a revelation that would change everything. My family would treat me differently now. Colleagues would see me differently. Social events would carry different expectations. But the work would remain the same. The research would continue. The new pediatric oncology wing would open next month and begin saving children's lives. And sometimes that was all that really mattered. 3 weeks later, Dad called. Claire, I've been thinking about what happened at the gala. And I owe you an apology. A real one, not just embarrassment about being wrong about your financial situation. I'm listening. I taught you to value substance over appearance, meaningful work over social status, helping others over accumulating wealth. Those were the values your mother and I raised you with. I was quiet, letting him continue. And then I married Victoria and got caught up in her world of social positioning and status competition. I started criticizing you for living the values I'd taught you because they didn't fit the image Victoria wanted our family to project. Dad, let me finish. What you've accomplished, the research, the treatments that are saving children's lives, the quiet generosity, that's exactly the kind of person your mother and I hoped you'd become. I'm sorry it took a public announcement for me to remember that. It was the apology I'd been waiting years to hear. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. Is there a way for us to rebuild this relationship? To get back to the father and daughter we used to be? I thought about it for a moment. Yes, but it means choosing family over social status. It means valuing who I am over what I can provide. And it means recognizing that success looks different for different people. I can do that. Even if Victoria disagrees? A long pause. Claire, you're my daughter. You'll always be more important than anyone else's opinion of what our family should look like. It was a start. 6 months later, I attended the opening ceremony for the new pediatric oncology wing. This time I wore a beautiful dress that cost more than my car. Not because I cared about appearances, but because the occasion deserved celebration. Dad and Victoria were there, along with dozens of families whose children would benefit from the new facility. David had brought his girlfriend, who turned out to be a pediatric nursing student. As we toured the bright, cheerful rooms designed specifically for young patients, I watched Dad talking with other parents, learning about their experiences and listening to their stories. You know, he said to me as we stood in the new family lounge, I'm starting to understand what real success looks like. What's that? Using your gifts to make life better for people who need help. Building something that matters more than profit margins or social status. He gestured around the beautiful space, where children would receive life-saving care in an environment designed for hope and healing. This is success, Claire. This is what making a difference actually looks like. For the first time in years, I felt like I had my father back.